Yeah,
Well,
it was a
and
good surprise.
that's good. And today was not a rainy day, so maybe
Mm-mm.
that's a confounding variable in there.
Hmm. Although I
Okay.
did, although I did find that the majority of the shoppers were female.
Okay, so mostly females.
Hmm.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Morgan.
So I did the same thing, but I did it at Target. And my hypothesis was that women would bring the cart back to the corrals, and then men would just leave it by their car. And I found that I was right just by one or two females. But I was kind of surprised because I had the opposite as Elise. What, there were like an equal amount of men and women that like shopped.
Hmm. So it wasn't disproportionately women. Perhaps we could
Yeah.
create a super hypothesis as to shopping behavior of men and women, Target versus Meijer. Maybe men are more intimidating by Meijer. Who knows? Okay, great. Thanks, Morgan. How about you, Haley? Gooches.
I hypothesized that younger people would bring their carts um, back to the corral or inside, and I went to Meyer as well. And I actually found that the older people put it back, and the younger people were more in a rush and just left it by their cars or didn't put it in the correct spot.
Mm. Was it disproportionate to the young versus old?
Um, yes,
More
the
younger people or more older?
more. Yeah, I saw more old. Well, while I was there, I saw more older people than younger, so I noticed more of that. But I went towards the morning, so that could be why as well.
And I'm super curious. How did you define older? Just trying not to feel bad
Um,
about
I
myself.
looked more like towards the people who were parking in the handicap spots, closer up, or who had to park closer. Um, and I don't know. I just like not. I would say like over 60s. I probably.
Okay. Okay, cool. Awesome. And how about you, Samantha?
Okay, so I work at Dunham's, and I just observed people wearing masks because that's like a big issue we have actually. So my hypothesis was that more than 5 people would come in not wearing masks, and I was right. 6 people came in, and then I kind of took it a little bit further and I guess if they argued or if they like would get a mask, and out of the because there were 6 people that came in without a mask. I'm trying to remember, 3 of them just forgot them in their car and went back to get them. One of them argued and then called me a mean name.
Oh,
And then another one just straight up left. So,
wow. So this is a big recurring issue at Dunham.
yes, yes. Like
Eh,
we get people like completely, I've been called so many names. Like it's so bad. But
Wow.
very interesting, very interesting.
All right, so now I'm super curious. Have the rest of you encountered this going into stores, like these interactions where somebody's being told, hey, wear a mask? Because I feel like on the whole, most people I've seen in stores, and I don't go to stores a whole lot, just I hate shopping, um, people are wearing masks. So I'm surprised hearing that, but yeah, that's maybe part of a reality I wasn't aware of. Is that other people have experienced that too?
Yeah,
Really?
I think more so like at the beginning.
Yeah.
I saw a lot more people that didn't want to wear it at the beginning, but like now I feel like there's more people that wear them.
Although I feel like that might be about to revert back with the latest decision in the Michigan Supreme Court, right, in regards to the governor's right of power, that some people are like, wow, she can't tell us what to do. Anyway, let's not get into the
Well,
politics of it,
at
but
Target, we actually took our signs down to wear masks, just because like so many people didn't care. And it's been such a problem that even my coworkers will like fight with each other over wearing masks
Where do you work again, Haley? I didn't hear the first part.
at Target.
At Target.
Yeah, just yesterday, my coworkers actually had a fight like on the sales floor. It was so embarrassing because one of them didn't have their mask on, and another one told her to put her mask on, and she flipped out.
Wow.
And I would say probably like at least half our customers don't wear masks.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Do you guys have to, I guess as a store, do you require masks? Like if they don't come in, then they can't shop?
We're supposed to, but Target rolled back the decision to require it, like to tell us or to tell them. So now if they come in, we can't do anything about it.
Oh my God.
Really?
You have to like tell people to leave.
I wish we could do that.
I mean, you get
I don't
called
want
some
to
interesting
play games,
things,
though, so I
but
probably wouldn't do it anyway.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
it's so intimidating. Like it's hard. It's very hard, but
Oh, I bet. It makes me super. I remember at the start of quarantine having to tell somebody to back up off me because she was, I swear, I think she was pushing to get her cart on top of my body to be as close as possible in the line. And this was like right in like the end of March, like everybody's like, everything's shutting down. And I was like, lady, you better back off. Why are you riding on me? There's 6 feet social distancing. And she was like, it's not even at the, anyway. Okay, yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Samantha. I am sad that your hypothesis was confirmed and that bad names were used. That's a major bummer. All right, how about you, Grace?
Which one?
Oh, sorry, Grace Joseph. Sorry. I'm going alphabetically. Yeah, sorry about that.
I sat at the Rockford Mire and observed people. I was originally in my car, but then I had like a hard time viewing the cart corrals. So I went and kind of like sat by a corral and just looked at like the aisle of all of them.
You're like,
And
I
was
made
watching.
eye contact as they were thinking of leaving them. No.
And my hypothesis was that people who were in a family group or a group of 2 or more people would be more likely to return their cart because of like that group mentality.
Mm,
And like parents would want to make a good impression on their kids or something.
mhm.
And I found that individuals, only like a small portion of individuals, which was 7% of the total people that I surveyed, didn't return the cart. And all of those 7% were individual people. But the other
Okay.
people that were in groups all returned their carts.
So your hypothesis is really confirmed by your observations then.
Yeah, but also I was at Meyer at like 8:30 at night, so there were not many family groups or groups in general. It was mostly
Mm,
individuals.
yep. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Grace. How about you, Tarshana?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I went to Meyer as well, but I kind of I didn't want to go when I call it like shopping rush hour. I didn't want to go, and that's like at like around noon through like 5 o'clock is like shopping rush hour. So I kind of went early, like an old lady. So I went and I like, you know how they have like chairs or whatever, like where the shopping carts are for
Yeah.
like the older people to sit or whatever, because they be out of breath by the time they get to the door or whatever. So I was sitting there for like the first like 10 minutes. I observed like families. When they came in, let me look at my notes. When they came in, they literally decided to, if they had a small group, like a small bundle of groceries, they took their groceries out at the cart and left the cart at the door. And
Mhm.
then like within the next like 5 minutes, the families that had like a bigger amount, like a larger amount of groceries, they actually pushed their carts to the car. And then they tagged along their children, they made their children put the cart back at the cart corral. And if they were by themselves, they left the cart by their car, if that makes
Ah,
sense. So
yeah.
I kind of had like a mix of everything. So it's just like, I don't really know if I should have started with my hypothesis, but I said if shoppers actually walk back to their cars with their cart full of groceries, then they are more likely to walk their cart back to the cart corral. So my hypothesis is initially wrong,
Mhm.
because it kind of depends on, like, I don't know, it depended on the situation. So if they had a large amount of groceries, they walked to their car and they made their children return the cart. But if they had a large amount of groceries and they were by themselves, they didn't walk the cart back to the cart corral. They left it by their car.
Yeah. Interesting, which I relate to that. I make my
Yeah.
children put the carts back, so I get that. And nowadays, I wonder what that's looking like, though, leaving your cart right at the entrance. I wonder for sanitation whether they like that or not. Maybe they don't
Yeah.
care.
So when what I noticed was if they leave their cart there, they actually the people who are like on cart duty or whatever, they take the cart, they wipe it down, and then they put it back. So it might be beneficial to them.
Mhm.
I'm not sure because I also went to Aldi's to see if I would get like a different standpoint from it, and they prefer for them to leave the cart where the guy that was standing out there cleaning the carts. They prefer for them to leave the cart there. So
Right.
if they did take their cart to the car, they walked it back to the guy instead of like walking it back to like the larger amount of carts.
Mhm.
That makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah. Interesting. And good on you for going extra early with, yeah, all the old ladies, like you said. All right. And Haley Potter.
Okay, so I did mine while I was working at Target. I work in the beauty department, and one of the biggest issues I've noticed is people don't like to put stuff back where it goes.
Mm.
So I did my assignment on whether or not people like when they pick up an item to read the description or just check it out. I wanted to know if they would be more likely to put it back or not. So my hypothesis was that most people wouldn't put the item back where it goes, just because there's always so many things out of place. So my hypothesis was actually wrong, and I was pleasantly surprised because I was really pessimistic going into it. And I also wanted to know if they like drop stuff on the floor, if they would pick it up and put it back where they found it, and they did.
Oh, wow.
In the half hour that I took out of my shift to do it, there was 16 people, and only three of them like put stuff where it didn't belong.
Wow.
Yeah, I was really
Which, that's impressive because sometimes you have all the best of intentions, but you're looking at, a lipstick and you're like, where is this color? Where does it go? Or, right?
Yeah.
Very cool. So do you think then, like pushing your hypothesis further, do you think that the reason why it's so messy in that section is that maybe people pick, a cosmetic and then they go and let's say buy groceries and then they come back to return it and they don't remember where they got it?
No, the biggest problem is just people pick stuff up and then put it back down immediately, and just either I don't know if they're lazy or they just can't figure out where it goes. But I never really see people come back.
Okay. They go once and then they're like, I'm done with the beauty department.
If they don't want it anymore, they just leave it up at the register.
Oh, that's a whole other discussion right there. Okay, thanks for sharing. And how about you, Miranda?
Okay, so I went to Walmart at about 7 p.m., so like after dinner, and my hypothesis was that the majority of people would return their carts back to the cart corral, and only a few would keep it by their cars, and no one would return it back to the store. And in that 30 minutes, I saw that it didn't matter whether they were with a family or if they were like by themselves, they returned it back to the cart corral. One person pushed it by someone else's car, and two people brought it back to the corral, but they left it like outside of the corral. So like in the end, that my hypothesis was supported by the data that was collected. And no one returned it back to the store.
That's kind of interesting. If you're going to put the effort to bring it back to the corral and just leave it right outside, was there just a ton of carts? Is that why?
Yeah, so I saw 6 of them like in my view, and I think like 2 or 3 of them were like very packed full. And like the people that brought it back to like the packed ones left it outside of the carts, but other people would actually like go that extra mile and like push it back in even though it was full.
Oh.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. It's kind of good, right? That's
Yeah.
to see that. Cool. All right. How about you, Daniel?
My hypothesis, I went to a coffee shop and my hypothesis was that most people would their drinks to go. And the reason I did that was because it's an outdoor coffee place. So usually, or I live close by there, so usually I see a lot of people there. But a lot of people did take their drinks to go, or most people took their drinks to go. But what I noticed was that the people that were there when I got there didn't even leave after I left. Like they stayed there for more than half an hour, or more than half the hour that I was there.
Were they all set up with like laptops and studying or like socializing?
They were socializing. They were in their own little groups.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So was your hypothesis then supported?
Yes.
Okay. But the ones that stayed, they stayed for a long time.
Yeah, they just stayed more than I did.
Right. Okay, cool. Thanks, Daniel. How about you, Jasmine?
I observed at a dollar store that I used to work at. And what I did, I did the shopping cart and I categorized them. Well, my hypothesis is that the younger people would put the carts more away than the older people, because that's what and I define that as like 45 plus as older or no, 46 plus is older and then 45 under is younger. And I kind of had this hypothesis because I work there, and that's what I used to see. I mean, most people would leave them by the door. So I thought that most people would leave them by the door. But what I found when I just like sat in the parking lot and watched from my car for 30 minutes, which was kind of creepy.
Did you have binoculars?
When they like saw me, I like pretended I was on my phone, so it was okay. I found that it actually made the difference if they were in a group or not. Usually there was more of 45 plus that would leave their carts in the parking spot, but most did leave them by the door, but almost all that were in a group, especially ones with children, always put the cart back. There was only 2 that did not.
So Jasmine, I'm curious, you had a very hard line, 45 and under, 46 and older. Were you carting people?
I was not. I was just looking at them.
Okay, so making just a judgment call based on what they look like. And
Yeah.
How did you choose that line?
Well, I just figured like usually by 45 people are set in their ways. So I mean, not that they're older, but so I just figured, well, by then they have made their decision if they're going to put the cart away or not for a lifetime. So that's just what I did.
Very cool. All right. Well, thanks for sharing. And last but not least, Grace Sweet.
Okay. So I went to Meyer right after we got done with class that night, or like that when we were in class. And it was the one in Granville. And I hypothesized that females would bring their carts back to the cart trail and males like wouldn't. And I saw a lot more females than males. But most of everyone I saw brought it back to the cart return, but then one male and one female left it by their car. So it was kind of weird data, I guess. When there wasn't like a definitive like people do this and people do that. So like most of them brought it back. But I did notice with couples, there was like a male and a female. The female would bring the cart back than the male when it was like both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. So then, and I also noticed that some people didn't put like the big cart in the big cart thing and the little cart in the little.
Yeah.
So then I was like, it'd be interesting to see like if like look at like how often people put it in the correct one versus the not right one. So
what I'm curious now with the males and females when they were in couples, did you notice if the women were the ones returning the cart, were the men driving?
I mean, I wasn't really looking for that, so I don't know if I noticed that.
I'd just be curious
Probably.
about that, right? Like
Probably.
kind of almost like a division of labor, like you return the car and then I'll be in the car starting it, and sometimes maybe I'll even back up and pick you up, or
Yeah,
yeah,
probably. Like,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know.
interesting. Okay, cool. What did you guys think of qualitative research? Observing randos, not looking creepy.
Well, I think it was just odd because it was either like you weren't paying attention to every person. You usually like pick your target and then like you focused on that particular person. So like if somebody else was actually like probably walking their cart to the cart corral, you were focusing on somebody who actually like, you know, looked around and put their cart off to the side and like got in their car and left. So it's kind of like, which one do I pay attention to more, or like do I just observe both of them, or like it's kind of like where do I look first?
Okay, so you're bringing up an excellent point. When you're doing qualitative research, your data is coming in either in spurts, right? Like there could be no one, and then all of a sudden there's a ton of people. And then you're having to use your own set of like innate skills, which is attention, vision, hearing, right? To see what's out there and then making sense of it. So inherently in what you described, having to pick the focus, what can be problematic with that?
Like your data can kind of be skewed if you did it like from a data analytical point or whatever, because now you have like outliers from this part because you focused on more of the people who like dipped their card off, or you might have, you know, vice versa. And then I forgot what else I was just about to say. But it could be like something else could have like altered, you know, perspectives. So you don't really focus on every piece, you just focus on one main point, so you're not looking at other things, you're looking at just one thing.
You're absolutely right. So when you do qualitative research, it is easy. Not, I mean, it springs into two forks. You can intentionally have bias because you're like, I am going to prove my hypothesis right, and then you're kind of unethical about your viewing of research. Or more often than not, it's non-intentional bias, where maybe your attention is going to be drawn to like groups, or you notice somebody first and then you only focus on them because you're busy viewing what they're doing and maybe are not noticing something else. So that's where having multiple observers can be really beneficial in qualitative research. So having more than one rater. But as we've talked about before, as soon as you have an additional rater, what becomes a potential pitfall? That was on the exam.
Reliability.
Yeah, what type of reliability? Inter-rater reliability, right? Exactly. So maybe there's two of us sitting here and we're observing, like Daniel's idea, coffee shop behavior. And if you think just you're in a coffee shop, what are you kind of bombarded with? Are you in a quiet environment? Daniel, maybe you can speak to that. What was the environment like when you were in the coffee shop?
It was quiet, but it wasn't like completely quiet, you know?
Okay. Well, I'm thinking most like coffee shops pre-COVID, maybe we need to put an asterisk to that. They're loud. There's like the grinder going, there's a person on the drive-through, they're talking to each other, people lined up, making their food, and then groups of people around you chatting. Like it's usually a very sensation high, right? Like there's just a lot of noise, smells, there's lots to visually tend to. So then to just solely focus on the thing you're focusing on, it's easy for there to be disparity. And even more so if you think of sitting in a parking lot where you're maybe only having visual contact with 2, maybe 3 cart corral, right? So then by default, you're kind of foregoing a section of the parking lot, and depending on where you parked, what are you omitting, right? Is there a bias left in that? So pitfalls of qualitative research. Now, what is one of the good things you've noticed by doing this versus doing a survey?
It's easier to get data.
In what way is it easier, Grace?
People don't have the option to refuse.
Right. I mean, it sounds wrong and mean when we say that you must participate in my research, but that's true, right? Because it's not private information, you're just observing normal everyday behavior. So you can decide, like, I'm going to do either 30 minutes or until I reach 50 observation, whatever comes first, and then see what happens. I'm not having to approach somebody, give them my spiel, have them sign a consent form, fill out a survey, make sure they filled out the survey correctly. So there's definitely some benefits to qualitative research that way. Yeah. Okay. Any fun takeaways or things you want to share? Final thoughts on qualitative research? Did you guys like that experiment? Kind of fun? Okay. Well, I'm glad. It was meant to be fun and educational, I should add, not just fun. Okay. So let me share my screen. Whoops. We are going to be doing the PowerPoint on bivariate correlational research. Can you guys see my cursor moving around? Yes. Okay. Come on. Okay. We are gonna stop. Let's see, what time is it in the world? 6:30. So yeah, I'm thinking halfway through we'll take a short 10-minute break. All right, so let's talk a little bit about bivariate correlational research. For a lot of you, when you're thinking about your research project that we've been working on this semester, you're getting geared up, working on literature review and all of that, thinking of your surveys, it is likely going to be a correlational research. So what is it? Why do we use that? So first, we're going to talk about what is bivariate correlation, and next we'll talk about how to look at specifically within that construct validity and statistical validity, because both of those things can be attained by doing a correlation. Okay, so it is by definition a bivariate. Bivariate means two variables, right? Bi and variate. And correlation is another word for relationship. So it's the relationship between two variables. And it's one that we're looking at as a constant relationship. It is not a predictor. It's not one variable predicts the other. It's how do they relate to one another, okay? And that's an important piece. We are not looking at causality. We are looking at correlation, meaning how do they relate with one another. So one of the examples here is the score that a particular individual received on a well-being scale and the percentage of conversation that they rated at as deep talk. Okay, so this is a particular study in your textbook. So as you go through, you can see how they scored has a relationship with the number of conversations they identified as being a deep conversation. So kind of the lower the number on the well-being scale, the lower the number of percentage of deep talk that they had, okay? So another way to say that would be, what is the correlation between a score on a depression scale and the number of times I cried last week, right? What would be your hypothesis as to the relationship there? I love that, Grace. What does that mean?
I was I was looking at the PowerPoint like off of the screen, so I was talking about like positive correlation.
Yes.
I couldn't actually see myself when I was doing it. I was just kind of like.
You're totally thinking it, but okay. So positive correlation would mean what?
That I'm assuming the higher the score you have on the depressive scale would be the more depressed you are, and more crying would mean that you're more depressed. So they both be high.
That's exactly right. So, and your line is correct, right? So if we were to think back to finding the slope of a line way back in, I don't know, when do you learn that? Pre-high school, whatever, it doesn't matter. The slope of the line, right, how flat it is, how steep it is, shows the relationship between two variables, right, which is variable x and variable y on your graph. in the case of a correlation, if you have a positive correlation, that means as one variable goes up, the other one goes up, meaning a positive slope, right? So as I'm, oh, watch out world, it's doodle time. So as one variable increases on the x-axis, right? Number of times I'm crying, this is a high number compared to a low number. This would be the score on a depression scale. So that's the numbers are increasing on the y-axis, right? So it starts off low and then it gets much higher, right? So as one variable goes up, the other goes up accordingly. So they have a relationship that they interact together. So if it's a positive correlation, they both go up at the same time. Now, a negative correlation would be as one goes up, the other one goes down, okay? So it would look, and I need to say this because oftentimes students get concerned with that. Having two variables have a negative correlation is not a bad thing. It's not like, oh, that's negative, that's not good. That's not it. It's devoid of that meaning. It's literally just describing the slope of a line. So if I have this kind of slope, that would be a negative slope because slope, which would be your y, right? Like that would be a negative number. And that's as one number decreases, well, let me look at this more closely. As one number increases on the x-axis, it actually decreases on the y-axis, okay? So the more often I go to the gym, the less I weigh, okay? Or the more, let's see, what would be something else? The more I sleep the night before an exam rather than the study, let's say, the lower my test score. Making stuff up here. Okay, so really negative only represents the slope of the line or the type of relationship the two variables have with one another. Okay, so that is the definition of a bivariate correlation. Whoops, what did I just do here? Okay. So this is just another example here. So we have, this is data from a specific study on multitasking. You can have the score on the multitasking frequency for these individuals and the accuracy on a specific task. So the higher they get on that score, well, as a trend, I would say the higher the number, the lower the score. And then here we have marital satisfaction. Where did you meet your spouse? These are all online. And then what's the satisfaction rating? So you can take a peek at that and see what are the relationship between the two. You need to make sure that the relationship, well, let me talk about that later, about the type of variables that you're using. We'll chat about that in a minute. But again, the idea is two variables and you're evaluating the relationship between them. Okay. So it is another way to describe the association. I'm using the word relationship a lot tonight, but association would be an equally good word as to how the two variables are interacting or relating to one another. And it's usually done with categorical data. So for association specifically. So when you're looking at a marriage study, the category they're in, right? Married, single, divorced, that would be the way you would measure it, and you would look at the association between those variables. Okay. Now, when you're looking at quantitative data, you're going to be looking at a specific number. They're going to have, so like I was saying, the number of times you cried, that's number, and a score on a depression survey, that's another number. And so then you can very easily plot them on a line, as you can see here in our example. So this one, the percentage of deep talk with the well-being scale, again, it's all plotted, but you see that yellow line, that's what's called a line of best fit. And you can see that that is, you know, well, what would you say is the slope of this line?
Positive.
Positive. Is it a strong positive?
Kind of weak.
It is weak. Okay. And here's how we know that. So if your slope is 0, what is your line going to look like? Horizontal. It's going to be completely flat. Okay. Yep. You got it, Tarshana. So that is 0 association, no correlation. It's literally, and that graph is kind of close to that. It'd be like something like this, right? Okay. Okay, I don't know how well you guys can see that, but all the dots are everywhere. So really the line of best fit would be like somewhere in the middle and it would look flat, okay? So that is a correlation that would be 0. Now something to know, correlations range between -1 and 1. They're gonna be somewhere in between. You cannot have a correlation of 5, that's not possible. You can't have a correlation of -10. It has to be between 1 and -1, somewhere in between there. So if your correlation is 0, you're really saying that the relationship between those two items is non-existent. So what is the relationship between wearing black shoes and scoring on a driving test? Yeah, like just at face value, you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense, right? And I had to be careful because I was thinking wearing black shoes and IQ, and I'm like, what if somebody's come up with some idea about that? Maybe there's a relationship there. But so that would be a correlation of 0. So if I go back to this is not a correlation of 0. It is a positive slope, but it is very small, meaning it's going to be positive, but probably like 0.05 or 0.1, very small. And then you can see here, there's actually a graph that gives you a sense as to whether your correlation is small, medium, or large. And that's going to be based on your correlational value, which is reported as an R value. So it'll be R equals anywhere between -1 and 1. The closer you get to -1 or 1, the stronger the relationship. So if you're at a 0.10, that is a small or weak relationship. Again, 0.3 or -0.3 would be medium or moderate. 0.5 would be large or strong. Now, I do need to tell you guys that with correlational values in the social sciences, that's what the values would look like. If you're doing medical science studies and looking at the impact of a drug, you want a correlation that's much higher than that, right? Before they decide to start a treatment that may be invasive or have side effects, they want to see that the relationship between the drug and the symptoms is very strong. So social science tends to be it's not quite as strong. So that's why even when you get a correlation of 0.3, 0.4, that's considered pretty good. Okay. So here we are again. This is something that's looking like kind of a hot mess. Can you see anything predictive here? What do we think?
I don't think there's a correlation because there's also a lot of variables above and below. So it's like to the two extremes, and then in the middle there's just kind of a clump that doesn't really show any kind of slope.
I think if we were to draw a line of best fit, looking at it, and your textbook would probably have more information, I am seeing a bit of a downslope with some of the values, but we are seeing these here that are just straight across, and there are some here that are straight across. But this clump right here does make me think it's a little bit negative. So again, for the purpose of this class, you're not going to be asked to figure out the correlational value or calculate it in any way. You'll be asked to interpret what it means to have a strong correlation versus a weak correlation. That's the main goal of the class. Okay, so we can look here. This is how we can graph some of those associations when one of the variables is categorical. So again, quantitative variables like we looked at earlier, you can do a scatter plot. If you are looking at an actual like categorical variable, it makes a lot more sense to use a bar graph. So here's marital satisfaction, right? You get a score on that, whether they are they've met online or offline, okay? Do you see how this is a little funky to read? This is a little easier to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes a bit more sense. And on this scale, it's hard to see really. There's a difference here, but not huge. Okay. This is, oh, and somehow we lost some of my writing here. This is the way you can analyze the association when one of the variables, again, is categorical. We tend to use a t-test rather than using an R. So this is the formula. I know, I'm sure you guys are like, yes, a mathematical formula. I've been waiting. You are not going to be asked to calculate it. This is just for your own edification so you know where it comes from. Okay, so what makes a study correlational? That seems like an important question that we need to give some thought to. So it's whenever you're having two variables that you're measuring and you are not manipulating either one. You're not changing it or switching it, you're just measuring it, okay? That's when a correlational study would make the most sense. When you start asking questions as to whether there's an association claim, again, association correlation, here are some of the questions you'll be asking specifically in regards to validity. So when we talk about construct validity and we ask the question, is this measuring what we think it is? It's how well was each variable actually measured? So if I'm looking at a depression scale, right, and it's asking questions like, what is your favorite color? And do you like to eat tacos or pizza? You might go, how does that measure depression? Not very adequately, right? You want questions that are going to relate to depression, and you're going to be able to take the score that somebody had on this test of depression that you're evaluating and compare it. You're going to do a correlational analysis to see how well it hangs together with their scores on another depression scale that's been well validated in a peer-reviewed research, right? So by virtue of that, you can state that it has strong construct validity if the scores hang together. If on Julie's depression scale, they scored a 10, and on the Beck Depression Inventory, which everyone agrees is a good scale, they scored a 90, there might be a problem with my depression scale, right? Because the scores are not going to be hanging together, provided they're both out of 100, right? Okay, so that's construct validity. Statistical validity, we've talked about quite a bit this semester. It's how well does the data support the conclusion? So again, I create a hypothesis, I measure it, and now I look at the statistical significance at the end. That's when you're going to get that p-value we've talked about before, showing is it actually statistically significant? Does it show that the results we obtained are not due to random chance, but they are in fact due to the fact that there is a relationship that exists between those variables. Internal validity looks at how well you can, the items within a scale hang together, right? Do they all measure the same construct within the scale? So can we somehow look at causal inferences from the association? So that is only within the item itself, not between the two variables, that you can start asking some of those questions. And then lastly, external validity is how well can the results we got generalize to the broader public and the general population at large. So when we look at correlational analysis, we're trying to evaluate these validity questions as well. Okay, let's dive deeper into all of that. So construct validity, again, for each of the variables. So it's both, right? Because bivariate analysis, you're going to have two variables. How and how well was each of the variable measured? Does it have good reliability, right? Are we going to get something consistent over time? And is it measuring what it's intended to measure? And lastly, what's the evidence as to how face valid it is? So meaning, is it going to be super easy to tell what it's measuring, and people, can they fake good or bad, which impacts validity right away, right? Okay. So here's a table that describes just that. There are some questions here you can ask yourself. So here's the two different variables. So one is this is an example we've been using in the textbook. So where did you meet your spouse, online versus offline, like in person? And what's your marital satisfaction? So how do we operationalize it? Again, we look at specific ways that we can measure that. So one is a self-report. Did you meet your spouse online? Yes or no, right? And the second one is the answers to a 4-item questionnaire as to how happily married they are. So here's some of the questions you would want to look at in terms of validity and reliability to make sure that you're actually measuring what you think you're measuring, right? So we've got a test-retest reliability. Again, are people giving the same consistent answer? Certainly to online or offline, that should be fairly consistent. But as to how well they're doing in their marital satisfaction, that may change a bit over time, right? That's a variable that we should expect to see some variability as they go on into the relationship. Okay, what is the internal validity? This is important. If there's only one question in your questionnaire, right? Did you meet online or not? There's no problem about internal validity. There's just one question. But when you're using a larger questionnaire, obviously you want to make sure that they all hang together. This is a keyword here, Cronbach alpha. That's going to be measured. That's the internal consistency or internal reliability of a scale. It's going to be measured or reported this way. You're going to have like, can you see that? A little Greek alpha like that. And then it's going to range from 0 to 1. The closer they hang together, the questions like are all measuring the same thing, the higher it'll be to 1. For any test, like in psychometric analysis, when you're doing test creation, anything above 0.7, 0.75 is pretty good. So that's where you're looking for. And then you can see here, there are several other questions. We've talked about the different types of validity, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on that, but we've definitely discussed these. So what would that look like with each of those specific variables, right? What are the questions we'd be asking? Okay. Statistical validity, as I mentioned, is first we want to see what's the effect size, how are things hanging together in terms of people's responses. Is the correlation statistically significant for the size of our sample? Are there outliers that are impacting the strength of our association? Is there a restriction of range, meaning everybody responded within a certain way, so there's bands of your graph that have no data? And is the association curvilinear, right? Like if you have an association that's like this, whoops, my camera's not back on, okay? If your data hangs, if you imagine there's points all around here, this is what's called a curvilinear response. That is very hard to interpret, right? So this would be something like if you were graphing someone's age, this would be age, and this would be living at home and how many miles you're living away from your parents or from significant others, siblings maybe. So you can see that at the start of your life, obviously you're staying at home. As you get older, maybe you go and move further away, but then as you get into older age, you move back towards your hometown, right? So that's a weird curvilinear relationship that makes it a little harder to predict what is actually the relationship between that. So those are things you want to keep in mind as you're looking at two variables and how they interact with one another. Okay, so if we look here, those are two scatter plots that are depicting the different association strengths. So these are just random variables here. So you see some are stronger than the other, and specifically the effect size is impacting the strength of the relationship. So if we see here, this first one, both are positive, right? You can see that. But you can see that B has a stronger association, right? This line is much tighter. There is less variance. This one is probably, the slope is going to be lower or smaller. This one's going to be straightforward. So this would show a stronger effect size, right? Does that all make sense? I'm doing a lot of talking here. Let me do some checking in. Is this all like, you're like, yeah, that makes sense? Back to stats. Looks like there's somebody grooving behind Grace. I like it. All right. I miss being in a class with all of you guys because it's way more fun and interactive than just me talking up my computer. Okay. here's why we do correlational studies, right? I just finished telling you earlier this class that it is not about causal relationship. It's about how we look at the relationship between two variables. But it also has some level of predictive power, right? If I know that these two variables interact in a certain way, like this, oop, I need to get my camera back on here. Okay, if I know here, okay, somebody give me an example. What is an example of something that has a positive correlation? As one goes up, the other one goes up.
Eating more McDonald's, your weight goes up.
Okay, awesome. So if I know that, here's McDonald eating, or here's weight, McDonald's, what's wrong with me? Can't even say it. So I start here, maybe my weight's in the normal range, and then I'm like, bring me that Big Mac, or no, is that Whopper? Whatever that is, food, McDonald's, fries. Tarshana's dying. She's like, what's happening? She knows nothing. McFlurry, is that a thing? That seems like a thing. McRib's a thing. Okay, more you're eating, more you're eating. Well, maybe you're getting to here. And what was that documentary? There was something about McDonald's, actually. Super Size Me. Did you guys ever see that? Okay. It's a
Super
document.
Size Me.
You got it, Daniel. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So right in that documentary, I forget his name, dude did this documentary and said, I'm going to eat McDonald's every day and see the health impact on my life by eating McDonald's every day. Okay, but somebody, a statistician, could have said, hey, dude, we already know this here. We know that over a period of whatever, 1 year, we watched and people's weight from day one until 365 days later, and then we asked, how many times did you go to McDonald's? Those that went to McDonald's more weighed more. So by virtue of this relationship, I can predict that if you continue to eat McDonald's, guess what? You're going to end up somewhere over here and weigh a lot more. I don't know why my pen is not working anymore. Anyway, I think you get the gist. Okay, so there is some predictive power within that you can say, because of the relationship that I know exists here and I have evidence to support it, I can then, much like any line on a graph, I can take it further and figure out where's the y-intercept, right? That's just basic graphing. So because of that, the larger the effect size you have, like the more closely it lines up here with your slope, the more predictive you can have, the more prediction you can have as you go down the line, okay? So this particular, that's fine. I just finished describing that. So this is, again, somebody's, what is it, height? I think it is height. Oh, yeah, they totally do that. When you take the kids to the pediatrician at age 2 or 5, they're like, we predict your child will be this tall. And I'm like, okay, you know what? By the time they're 19 or 20 and they're done growing, you and I are probably not going to have relationships. You're probably in your mind 100% correct. But they do that based on the height at a certain age, parents and mother's height. They can graph out where they're going to end up being. So there is some prediction power to that as well. Okay. Again, the larger the effect size, the more accurate your prediction is going to be. That's just, I mean, it just makes sense, right? Like the closer your data hangs together, the more you're going to be able to predict what it looks like on the other end. So especially when you're looking at drug trials, you want to see a really strong effect size to actually support using that medication for treatment. So aspirin and heart attack is a classic example, and they've done study upon study that when you start having chest pain, taking an aspirin will reduce the impact of the heart attack. And prophylactically, if you take an aspirin a day and you're at higher risk for cardiovascular problems, you are reducing your risk of a heart attack. So it is important to take a look at that, because now there may be some people who are like, I took an aspirin every single day of my life and I never had a heart attack, which, okay, that's, I mean, what's the impact there? Pros and cons, right? You have to take an extra pill, but if the negative effect was not that bad, maybe that's a low cost, to prevent something that would be very high cost. So because it does save a few lives every single year, it's still something that is seen as a powerful impact and powerful effect. Okay, before we dive into statistical significance, why don't we take a quick 10-minute break? It is 7:01. Can we come back here, let's say by 7:15? Sound like a plan for everyone? Okay.
Don't you have to talk to Bridget over the break?
I do. Well, I figured, Bridget, do you want to shoot me a text? I'm gonna reach out.
Yeah, I can do
Okay.
that.
Sounds
Sorry.
good. No problem. Okay, we'll see you guys by 7:15. Bye.